Izanagi is only the first persona I'll be giving a bio in this game, but all of them will follow the same format. I'll be showing their base level, their stats, inheritance type, the cheapest way to fuse them, if there are any fusion forecasts that benefit them specifically, and their skills learned. To briefly summarise the stats, strength affects your physical damage, magic affects magical damage, endurance affects defense against both physical attacks and magic, agility affects accuracy and evasion, as well as turn order, and luck affects a few things, but mainly your critical rates. I'm showing stats for the persona's base level, so Izanagi's don't look that impressive here. But overall I find skills matter a lot more than stats in this game, and Izanagi's skill set is actually very good for a starting persona, mainly Rakunda and Tarukaja. Those two skills are amazing in boss fights early on, especially on hard mode where they help you get around the damage modifiers. Izanagi also has pretty solid elemental affinities for a starting persona. Weak to wind, but it poses an immunity to darkness, which is very useful because all dark element attacks are instant kills, and if the protagonist dies, it's an automatic game over. Certainly a big step up from the starting persona of P3, which was weak to dark. Every persona has an inheritance type. In the PS2 version, this affected the likelihood of certain skills being passed down through fusion, but in Golden, you can choose what skills to pass down, so that's all moot, except that every inheritance type has some skills they can't inherit at all. In this case, you can see can't inherit for Izanagi is wind. Now, this only applies to skills passed down through fusion, and you're likely to never need to fuse a copy of Izanagi. Personas can still learn skills restricted by their inheritance type through skill cards or level up. And speaking of skill cards, I've highlighted Zaoh in orange because that's Izanagi's skill card ability. But we won't be able to do anything with that for a while, so that's just something to keep in mind for later. Overall, as far as starting personas go, Izanagi's very good and will serve you pretty well through the early parts of the game. But this isn't Pokemon. You will likely be getting rid of your starting persona very quickly, and don't worry too much about that. We'll have to constantly switch out our personas to keep up with the enemy's power levels. But while we have him, it's important to talk about his mythological significance. Persona 3's party member personas focused heavily on Greek mythology. In Persona 4, it's all about Japanese mythology. And Izanagi is one of the central figures in Japanese myth, being one of the two creator gods of Japan. He, alongside his wife/sister, why does mythology love incest so much, Izanami, gave birth to what would become the archipelago of Japan, as well as many other gods. However, Izanami died giving birth to Kagutsuchi, the fire god. Stricken with grief, Izanagi journeyed to the underworld to try and rescue her, and if this sounds familiar to you, there are actually a lot of parallels between the myths of Izanagi and Orpheus, the protagonist of Persona 3's starting persona. So I wonder if this was a deliberate choice by the designers. What definitely was deliberate is the way Izanagi was designed. He was meant to look not just stereotypically Japanese, I mean you can even see what resembles Geta on his feet, but his outfit resembles both Japanese teen delinquents and Japanese Oendan or cheer squads, which fits with the protagonist's role as the one who supports and brings out the best in his teammates. Loki is a very popular figure from Norse mythology and one of the most famous trickster gods. Being a Jotun or part Jotun in some sources, Loki is the father of Hel, goddess of the underworld, the wolf Fenrir, and the world serpent Jormungand. And through a complicated plot to sabotage a construction by distracting a builder's horse, he's also the mother of Sleipnir, Odin's six-legged steed. Loki could be summed up as the chaotic neutral type, either siding with or against the other gods depending on what he felt was most fun at the time. And they considered his antics harmless pranks until his involvement in the death of the god Balder. for which he suffered a fairly disturbing punishment, being bound to a rock with entrails while a snake constantly dripped venom onto him, his writhing in agony causing the world's earthquakes. But it's prophesied that during Ragnarok, Loki will escape. In that battle, he's one of the last gods standing along with Heimdall, and the two end up killing each other. Loki's name might be derived from the word for knot or loop, implying entanglements, probably a reference to his many schemes. He also became associated with nets and spiderwebs as a result. In-game, not only is Loki an ultimate persona you are guaranteed to have if you find the path to the true ending, he's also the lowest level ultimate persona in the game by far. And for his level, I'd say he's actually a pretty solid option, having decent stats apart from low endurance and luck, and he'll eventually learn a null skill to cover his one weakness. Loki learns the strongest ice attack in the game, Niflheim. Back in P3, Skadi had this skill. And he learns Ice Amp to boost its power. With Ice Boost passed down or given via a skill card, and with Mind Charge, Niflheim can do some pretty good damage, despite the major nerf to severe tier spells since Persona 3. Sadly, Loki's skill card ability, Sharp Student, is not that great. You might think it's useful insurance against knockdowns, but you're immune to criticals anyway if you have Null, Absorb, or Repel Physical, and all of those skills should be readily available to you at this point in the game. Still, Loki does have the best ice damage in the game, which definitely counts for something. Mada's name means intoxicator, although in Hindu theology it also means pride or stubborn mindlessness. He's an enormous Rakshasa with 2 mouths big enough to swallow the earth and the heavens simultaneously. And he was summoned because 2 gods were upset that they didn't get invited to a party. The twin gods, the Aswins, wanted to drink the Elixir of Immortality, or Soma, which you might recognize from the item in this game. But the king of the Devas, Indra, had not invited them to his party where they could drink this. They tried to take it up with him personally, but he still refused. So they sought the aid of a great sage. He tried to perform a sacrifice in their name, but this only angered Indra even more because he refused to acknowledge the twins as worthy of sacrificial offerings. So he tried to attack with a mountain in one hand and a thunderbolt in the other. In response, the sage summoned Mada, the enormous beast who could swallow the heavens and the earth, and Indra was basically like, okay, you win, and let the twins attend his party. In-game, Mada exemplifies the qualities of the Magician Arcana in Persona 4, high magic and a specialty for fire. He learns both Fire Boost and Fire Amp naturally, which stack, and combined with his enormous magic and Maragidyne, he's gonna hit extremely hard. Naturally draining fire is nice, and even though he doesn't learn anything to cover his ice weakness, at the level you confuse him, you probably have access to Repel Ice. His skill card is annoyingly kind of lame. I don't find most status ailments to be useful in Persona 4, even with ailment boosts. And really, Mada is strong enough to fire nuke most things you'd want to silence anyway. Mada does have a very low agility stat for his level, which could mean he suffers from accuracy issues, so bear that in mind. It may be a good idea to keep Argidyne for single targets, because multi-target spells are slightly less accurate than single-target ones. Overall, Mada is really all about doing fire damage and not much else, but if that's what you want, you can't really go wrong. Scathach comes from Irish mythology. Her name literally means shadowy. She's primarily known as the mentor of the hero Cuchulainn, and most notably appears in The Wooing of Emer, and forgive me if I mispronounce a lot of these names, I don't have a lot of experience with Gaelic. The longest story in the Ulster cycle, it tells the story of Cuchulainn's journey to prove himself to a chieftain so he could marry their daughter. The chieftain, not approving of the match, sent him to train with Scathach in what is now Scotland, secretly hoping that he'd die at some point on the way. But Cuchulainn proved to be a bit of a Gary Stu and was basically invincible. Scathach trained him and taught him how to use the legendary spear Gaybolg. But while he was there, Cuchulainn began an affair with her daughter, was challenged to a duel by her daughter's lover and easily won. So Scathach promised her daughter to him. He later helped in the conflict between Scathach and her rival, and in some sources twin sister, and if Valkyria Chronicles is any indication, this name is pronounced Aoife. Anyway, Cuchulainn distracted her, defeated her in battle, and promised that he'd let her live under two conditions. First, that she end her feuding with Scathach, and second, that she bear him a son. And in some sources, Cuchulainn sleeps with Scathach as well. So it's a story about how one man, in his quest to marry the woman he loves, ends up sleeping with three entirely different women. Not to mention that even after all of that, the chieftain still wouldn't let him marry the one girl that he set out to marry, so he invaded his castle, killed a whole bunch of his men, killed him, and abducted her. Oh, and he later ends up killing the son he had with Scathach's rival without even realizing it was his son. Weird mythology aside, Scathach is the ultimate persona of the Priestess Arcana in Persona 4, a title that she maintains from Persona 3. In that game, she was a hybrid physical and magical attacker, but here she's mostly focused on magic despite having a solid strength stat. She primarily focuses on ice and wind skills, and learns both Ice Amp and Wind Amp, along with Mind Charge. It's also not too hard to fuse Ice Boost and Wind Boost onto her, so I find she's a very good late game Ice and Wind user. I do say late game though. One thing with Persona 4 is that most of the rank 10 social link personas are very, very high level. We're not going to be able to fuse most of them until the last few dungeons. But once you are at level 79, Scathach is definitely a persona I'd recommend. The skill I've highlighted in orange is the skill card she'll give if you take her to Cafe Chagall. Amrita would normally be a very good skill card, except that by the time you have access to it, you probably have access to the skill card for Salvation, and so why not use that? Isis is one of the most iconic Egyptian gods, though recent studies have found that her name was originally pronounced more like Usat, and later Iset. She gained the name Isis when worship of her caught on in Greece and Rome. She was worshipped as a mother goddess, and also as a powerful magic user. Through her husband/brother Osiris, what is it with ancient mythology and incest, seriously? She gave birth to the god Horus. But first she had to gather Osiris's scattered parts and resurrect him after he was killed and dismembered by Set. The Isis-Osiris-Set myth is one of the most well-known in Egyptian mythology. A myth that became integral to Egyptian concepts of succession and kingship, embalming rituals, and the afterlife. During the New Kingdom, she began to take on characteristics of the god Hathor, in particular an association with cows. When she was adopted by the Greeks, this became an association with the Greek myth of Io as well. Isis was a popular deity in part due to her reputation for compassion. For example, in one myth, some minor scorpion deity she was traveling with took revenge on a human woman who refused to help her by stinging the woman's son. Isis, knowing that the child had done no wrong, took it upon herself to heal them. As I mentioned earlier, worship of Isis later spread to Greece and Rome, and she became the subject of many mystery cults with complicated initiation rituals. Isis was the ultimate persona of a party member in Persona 3, but here she's been downgraded to merely the ultimate Empress persona. She's an interesting one. Her stat spread is fairly low for her level, but she learns a nice mix of great offensive, defensive, and passive skills, getting Salvation for healing, Ice skills for damage, Cool Breeze to restore SP, Null Elect to get rid of her weakness, and Absorb Ice to make her Ice affinity even better. Absorb Ice is also her skill card, which makes her very valuable to fuse for that alone, though be warned that once registered to Marie, this skill card is very expensive to buy back. Overall, don't let her raw stats fool you. Isis's skills may be a worthy reward for finishing Margaret's requests. Odin, Woden, Wotan, or any of the other 170 plus names you could call him. Seriously, Odin has enough names to fill an entire Wikipedia article. Literally. Is one of the most famous and revered gods of Northern European mythology. I say that because while most people call it Norse, he was also worshipped by the Anglo-Saxons. To the point where some places in England are named after him, such as Winnisborough, which might have come from Woden's Hill. And of course, he's immortalized in the Western days of the week as the namesake of Wednesday. Odin is an interesting god because while he's associated with war, he's also tied to wisdom, magic, and healing, along with poetry. He's often depicted as one-eyed with a long beard, wielding his spear Gungnir, and riding the six-legged horse Sleipnir. He has many sons, but Thor is by far the most famous of them. In some myths, he took part in the creation of the world by slaying the giant Ymir and giving life to the first two humans, Ask and Embla, two names that might be familiar to you if you've played a certain Fire Emblem game. He'll lead the Einherjar, the souls of warriors who died in battle, at Ragnarok, but there he's fated to meet his doom at the jaws of the wolf Fenrir. In-game, Odin is another returning ultimate persona from P3. There, his signature skill was Thunder Rain, but now it's been passed on to his son, Thor. Instead, he now learns the ultimate wind skill, Pantaray. But he hasn't lost his Zeo skills completely, he just specializes in two elements now. Weirdly, his inheritance type is electricity, which means he can't inherit wind skills through fusion, but he already has most of the wind skills he needs. He's relatively low level for an ultimate persona in P4, and has a very high magic stat along with naturally learning Mind Charge and Wind Amp to boost the damage of Pantaray even more. This is also his skill card ability, which is decent to pass down to other wind-using personas, especially ones that already have wind boost. His main weakness is having no way of covering his weakness to fire, at least with his own skill set. With some clever fusing, you should be able to pass down fire immunity skills to him though. Overall, Odin's role in P4 is very similar to his role in other Persona games, being a source of massive magical damage, which makes him a decent ultimate persona to fuse, especially since level 74 is not that high by ultimate persona standards. Kohryu is the Japanese reading of Huanglong, and I apologize if I butchered that, the yellow dragon from Chinese mythology. It is the fifth of the four symbols and is considered the master of them, representing the center as well as the element of earth, as well as the midsummer period, which was sometimes considered a fifth season. The yellow dragon is also sometimes considered the zoomorphic incarnation of the Yellow Emperor, another legendary Chinese figure who is a separate persona in Persona Q2, and I think that's his only appearance in the Persona sub-series. The Yellow Emperor was said to have turned into the Yellow Dragon at the end of his life to ascend to the heavens, which in some accounts led to dragons being considered symbols of imperial power in China. In Persona 4, Kohryu retains its position of Ultimate Hierophant persona from Persona 3, but it works a little bit differently here. In that game, it learned almost entirely support skills, and while it's still fairly support-based in P4, it learns some offensive abilities in the form of Zeodyne, Maziodyne, and Mind Charge. But it's still no slouch on the support front, learning the fantastic Spellmaster, as well as Salvation, though it's not the earliest source of salvation in the game. It also has no weaknesses, making it a very solid persona to carry around for both offense and support. Just like most games it's in, Kohryu can only be fused one way, a special fusion using the four symbols. This limits the kind of skills that it can potentially inherit. However, via Seiryu, you can pass down Elec Boost, which will stack with Elec Amp, and Byakko can pass down Ice Amp and Mabufudyne. And Suzaku can pass down Fire Amp to Agidyne, so you can really run any element you want on Kohryu barring wind. Other useful skills that its components can pass down include High Counter, Mataruunda, Resist Physical, and Marakukaja. Overall, Kohryu has a decent spread of both offensive and defensive skills, all in a persona with no weaknesses and at a lower level than many of the other ultimates, so I'd say he's a very good option. Oh, and having the skill card for Summer Rakam doesn't hurt either. It's a nice filler option on any persona, really, if you can spare a skill slot for it. Ishtar is an Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian goddess of love. She was originally an independent deity, but following the conquests of Sargon of Akkad, She was conflated with Inanna to the point where they eventually became regarded as two different names for the same deity. Ishtar was associated with the morning star or Venus, and her symbols include an 8-pointed star, lions, and doves. She may have influenced the Phoenician goddess Ashtoreth or Astarte, who themselves influenced the Greek goddess Aphrodite. But Ishtar was not a happy sunshine and roses love goddess. Not only was she known for treating her lovers very badly, but she was also a goddess of war and conquest. Her most famous role these days is from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where she offers Gilgamesh to be her consort. He points out her questionable history with all of her lovers and refuses, and so she essentially blackmails the gods into giving her access to the Bull of Heaven to attack Gilgamesh with, resulting in a series of events that leads to his best friend Enkidu dying and Gilgamesh coming to terms with his own mortality. But much like Orpheus and Izanagi, she's also the center of a descent to the underworld myth, which was ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. The short version is that Ishtar is trapped down there because those who enter the underworld can never leave and dies. She is later revived, but someone else must take her place. Coming back to the world of the living, she notices that her consort, Doomzid, has been living in luxury instead of mourning her, so she points and says, "Yep, take him." Eventually an agreement is reached upon which Doomzid spends half a year in the underworld while his sister spends the other half there, while Ishtar, the one who initiated all this, faces absolutely no consequences. In gameplay terms, Ishtar is one of the lower leveled ultimate personas in the game, and her overall stats are not particularly high. Her main focus is her skill set, learning a lot of good healing including salvation, and having the skill card for Medea Rahan. A nice option for pretty much any persona if you can spare a skill slot. Learning Spellmaster is also great, and she then learns Absorb Wind to cover her one weakness. Notably, Absorb Wind can turn into some pretty high tier skills if you fuse her on a skill change day, but I don't know if I'd be willing to give up such a good skill in the first place. Especially since once Ishtar learns Absorb Wind, it can very easily be spread around through fusion. Ishtar is a healing persona first and foremost, and is another one of those I'd fuse more for fodder skills for other personas than for actually using her herself in battle. But Spellmaster and Absorb Wind definitely make her worth fusing. Although, don't tell her I said this, but you can get Absorb Wind at only level 55 through Lachesis. Futsunushi is a warrior god of swords in Japanese mythology, and is considered something of a brother to Takemikazuchi, being also born from the blood on Izanagi's sword from killing the fire god Hinokagutsuchi. Futsunushi is considered the local deity of the Katori Shrine in the Shiba prefecture. There are several different theories as to the origin of his name. The compendium offers one of them, but another is that Futsu comes from the old Japanese onomatopoeia for the sound of a sword swinging and cutting something. As I mentioned in Takemikazuchi's bio, Futsunushi was sent to accompany him by the gods when they went to claim the Izumo region. In-game, Futsunushi is level 80 and requires a unique quintuple spread, meaning there's only one possible way to fuse him. From these component personas, the most notable skills that he can inherit would be Vile Assault from Kinki, which might hit harder against down foes than Primal Force while power charged, along with Dia Rahan and Brave Blade from Adavaka. Brave Blade is weaker than Primal Force but has a higher crit rate. For a physical-based persona, Futsunushi has a really good base learn set though, starting out with Primal Force, Power Charge, and Mataru Kaja, then learning Apt Pupil to raise his crit rates, and Arms Master later on to halve the cost of physical skills. This is also his skill card, making him a great persona to have, because he indirectly makes your other physical personas even better. But Futsunushi has another unique asset, the skill Ali Dance. He is the only persona to learn this by level up. It halves the hit rate of anyone targeting the user. And then he weirdly learned a skill at level 86 that totally contradicts that, Firm Stance. Now, Firm Stance is normally a fantastic skill, but it renders Ali Dance totally useless, which is one of Futsunushi's unique assets, so I'm not sure if I recommend learning it, and if you do, make sure you have it replace Ali Dance, because, well, halving the enemy's accuracy doesn't mean anything when you can't dodge. By the way, status ailments, including the instant death from Hama and Mudo, operate on a different system of accuracy than the standard one, so don't worry, Firm Stance will not cause you to be automatically hit by those. That'd kinda suck. Sraosha comes from Zoroastrian mythology, which doesn't get a lot of representation in this series, so I'd recommend looking up more info on it if you're interested. Sraosha literally means conscience or observance, and that describes his role. He acts as the ear of Ahura Mazda, the supreme figure of good in Zoroastrianism, and is the means by which humans are able to communicate with them. Sraosha is often depicted as a guardian of humans, and is one of the 3 guardians of the Bridge of Judgement that Souls of the Dead cross. One of the other 3 is Mithra, by the way. But of those 3, Sraosha is the one to physically accompany the soul across the bridge. His enemy is Ashma, a demon associated with wrath, war, and conflict. And of the ethical goals of Zoroastrianism, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, Sraosha is associated with good deeds. As a persona, Sraosha is a little unique. Being the Justice Arcana, it's inclined towards light-based instant kill attacks, but his stat build leans more towards being a physical attacker. And he starts with Brave Blade and Power Charge to complement that. He does learn some pretty solid magic, including Megadola, but not a great magic stat to back that up. This physical emphasis is a bit of a problem because the light inheritance type, from what I gather, prevents Sraosha from inheriting physical skills in fusion. So if you want anything more than Brave Blade, you'll have to use skill cards. Speaking of skill cards, Sraosha's skill card is the final ability that he learns, Angelic Grace, which doubles evasion against everything except Light, Dark, and Almighty. And by all accounts, this does include physical attacks in Persona 4. It complements Sraosha's high agility very well. Theoretically, you could stack this with Ali Dance for the ultimate evasion tank build, but that skill is exclusive to Futsunushi, there's no skill card for it, and I don't know if it can be passed down via fusion. You could always extract the skill card from Sraosha and give it to Futsunushi, I guess. Sraosha also has an unfortunate dark weakness that, unlike some Ultimate Personas, it never learns a skill to cover, so stay away from enemies that use those skills. So overall, Sraosha offers a very interesting skill set: light-based instant kills, evasion tanking, and power charge physical attacks. But to make him a true physical powerhouse, you may have to rely on skill cards. Ongyo-Ki is a mythological figure that isn't very well known outside of Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, having originated from only one specific Japanese folktale, but I'll try my best to explain what he's about. Firstly, he's a type of Oni, creatures from Japanese folklore usually depicted as large, strong, brutal humanoids with horns who eat people and have a penchant for wielding clubs, and are often used as the villains in fairy tales. This leads them to often be compared to Western ogres, although they have a little bit more of a spiritual significance, sometimes being seen as reincarnated souls of the dead. Ongyo-Ki isn't your average Oni though. He's one of 4 very special Onis summoned by Fujiwara no Chikata, said to be a noble from the Heian period who started a rebellion against the Japanese imperial court. He summoned and controlled 4 Oni: Kinki, the Gold Oni, Fuki, the Wind Oni, Suiki, the Water Oni, and Ongyo-Ki, the Stealth Oni. Between Kinki's practically indestructible body, Fuki's ability to blow down even castle walls, Suiki being able to freeze anything, and Ongyo-Ki's ability to perfectly mask its presence, Fujiwara seemed unstoppable. That is, until they were all defeated by poetry. Yes, really. Someone recited, "All things, whether grass or tree, are ruled by the Emperor, and not even a devil can turn his back on the Emperor and live in this land," and that dispelled all 4 of them. These 4 Oni, Ongyo-Ki in particular, are sometimes said to be the inspiration for ninja. But I wonder if this story could just be a heavily dramatized account of one man who had 4 very powerful followers. In gameplay terms, Ongyo-Ki is a weird persona. It has a higher magic stat than strength, but it's of the physical inheritance type, which prevents it from inheriting most magical skills. Its moveset also consists entirely of support skills apart from Zeodyne. And despite having some nice immunities, it's also weak to lights. Ongyo-Ki, like several of the game's ultimate personas, can only be made by a unique fusion spread. This one uses Oni plus the other 3 Onis that Fujiwara summoned. Through this, Ongyo-Ki has easy access to Power Charge and some other strong physical skills via Kinki, but the other 2 Oni have some good magic skills that sadly can't be passed down. Suiki does get Enduring Soul though, which is a pretty insane skill, so if you can level it up, make sure to pass that one down. Speaking of insane skills though, that's really Ongyo-Ki's main niche, its final learned skill, which is also its skill card ability, Firm Stance. This I find really ironic because Ongyo-Ki is supposed to be about stealth, and even learns an evasion buff, but they decided to give him the skill that forces you to face tank damage. Firm Stance is a skill that I actually see on most endgame Persona builds via skill cards. It seems a lot of players prefer reliably taking half damage over the chance of taking no damage at all. Also, unlike in Persona 3, there is no accessory that bestows this ability, so it's a lot more useful to have it on Personas or as a skill card. Despite all the effort you have to go to defuse him, Ongyo-Ki is sadly not much more than skill card fodder. But if it's any consolation, it is a very good skill card. Norns are a class of being that presides over fate in Norse mythology. There are many Norns of a variety of races such as elves and dwarves, but the 3 Norns that this persona represents are the 3 primary ones, a group of Jotuns or giantesses, Urthr, Verdandi and Skuld, in my best attempt at Old Norse, which is not good. Presiding loosely over past, present, and future, though their names more literally mean what has happened, what is currently happening, and Skuld is the most interesting because it translates to debts, but what it actually means is what ought to happen, or what should happen. I personally find the idea of the future as a debt really fascinating, and from what I can gather of their legends, and there isn't that much info on them overall, the Norns appear to be depicted as something akin to cosmic lawyers. It's also their job to maintain the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil, using the water from their Well of Fate. Many European cultures had myths about 3 sisters presiding over fate. The Greeks had Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, and those are the 3 personas that need to be fused together to make Norn. It is considered a secret fusion. From their components, Norn has guaranteed access to Wind Boost to stack with Wind Amp, along with Makarakan, Mind Charge, and Evade Fire. Norn itself has low endurance but decent stats elsewhere, learns some decent skills in Dia Rahan and Oro Masuku. Its skill card ability of Insta-Heal is not really that great, especially since there's another skill card that can make you outright immune to most ailments. But the real prize here is Debilitate. This skill is not only a fantastic boss killer, it's also very unique for fusion purposes. It's not a signature move. There is one other persona that learns it by level up, and another one that gets it via a special fusion forecast, but it is treated as a signature move for the purposes of inheritance, meaning it cannot be passed down through fusion. It is, however, possible to get it via skill card. But until you have access to that, personas that learn Debilitate are very, very valuable. Though most players prefer the other source of Debilitate, who I'll get to later, Norn learning it at all is still an amazing asset that makes it definitely worth fusing. Zaoh-Gongen, or Avatar Zaoh of the Diamond Realm to use his full translated title, which sounds awesome, is a product of Shinto Buddhist syncretism. As Buddhism expanded into Japan and eventually became its official religion, local kami started being considered incarnations or manifestations of Buddhas. And this is what the term Gongen means. Zaoh was a mountain deity worshipped by the Shugendo sect, who conducted aesthetic training in mountainous regions. He's the protector of Mount Kimpusen in Japan's Nara prefecture. And as a Gongen, he's considered an incarnation of 3 Buddhas: the original historical Buddha, Kanon or Avalokiteshvara, yep, Risei's personas making yet another appearance, and Miroku or Maitreya Buddha, who you will know if you're familiar with SMT Apocalypse. These 3 are considered the Buddhas of the past, present, and future. Zaoh-Gongen's depiction in this game is very accurate to a lot of his traditional artwork, being bluish-black in colour, with hair standing on end, and holding a Vajra in his right hand to represent a thunderbolt. Zaoh is often depicted in an intimidating, wrathful appearance, symbolising his vanquishing of evil thoughts and actions. For a social link that will likely be one of the first you ever establish, Zaoh-Gongen's level is bizarrely high. At level 90. By the time you're this strong, you're probably ready to fight the final boss without much help. So what does Zaoh-Gongen bring to the table? Well, he has an enormous endurance stat and very good strength as well. He starts out with power-charged God's Hand, later learns Vorpal Blade, and has some useful passives in Enduring Soul, Evade Physical, and Fire Amp. He is of the Fire Inheritance type and not Physical, but this still lets him inherit physical skills, so that's fine. If you can get something like Primal Force or Blade of Fury onto him, he'll be even better. His electricity weakness can easily be covered by the Ultimate Judgement Persona's skill card. If you're at level 90, chances are you've maxed the Judgement social link. Speaking of skill cards, here's his Vorpal Blade. Normally a great skill, but it's generally agreed to be outclassed by Agnyastra in the late game, and that's the skill card of a different Ultimate Persona, so that's not a point in this guy's favour. All in all, Zaoh-Gongen is a very strong physical persona, but you aren't likely to be able to fuse him until you're almost done with the game, despite the fact that his social link is one that can be maxed very, very early. Attis was a god worshipped by the Phrygians, an ancient Indo-European people who dwelled in the southern Balkans, who was later imported into Greek and Roman mythology. As an advance warning, Attis' backstory is weird and fairly disturbing. He was born from the deity Agdistis, who possessed both male and female sexual organs, but the gods cut off the male parts, which grew into a tree, and a fruit from that tree was picked up by a woman, and that led to Attis existing. And it only gets weirder, because he eventually attracted the romantic attentions of Cybele, who is Agdistis in some accounts, therefore also his mother, and when he refused her advances, she drove him mad, leading him to castrate himself. In some accounts, this is how he died, while in others, he was killed by a boar sent by Zeus. Regardless of how it happened, it's said that he was reborn in some way, usually as a pine tree. Because of this, Attis is considered a life-death rebirth deity, as well as a god of vegetation, and sometimes shepherds. In-game, Attis is primarily a defensive persona, learning Marakukaja and Enduring Soul, fitting for his mythology, and healing skills like Samarakam and Amrita. He also learns some fire-based skills with a decent magic stat to back them up. Being weak to dark and learning no skill to cover that isn't exactly a point in his favour though. The main reason you would want to fuse Attis is for the Enduring Soul skill card. This is a great skill to use on any endgame persona. Combined with Risei's high social link abilities and other party members taking a mortal blow for you, it makes the prospect of a game over very, very rare. Mahakala is a deity featured in Hinduism, Buddhism, and in Japanese religious traditions, and all of them interpret him slightly differently. In Hinduism, Mahakala is sometimes considered another aspect of Shiva. His name comes from Maha, meaning great, and Kala, which means either death or time, or blackness. He and his consort Mahakali form a void that can consume even time and space. and he seems to represent time as the inevitable destroyer of all things. In Buddhism, Mahakala is a protector deity, and is sometimes connected to Avalokiteshvara, who I mentioned back in Rise's Ultimate Persona bio. He's especially prominent in Tibetan Buddhist traditions. This Buddhist variation made its way to Japan, where he became known as Daikokuten, a literal translation of Great Blackness. And in this form, he's considered one of the 7 lucky gods, and is depicted with a much friendlier appearance and considered a god of wealth, the household, the kitchen, and abundance. And while this may seem like a stark contrast, he does have a 6-armed, 3-faced, sword-wielding guardian aspect known as Sanmen Daikoku, which is clearly the aspect that his in-game design is based on. It's speculated that his role in Japan is a result of his Buddhist version being combined with the Japanese deity Okuninushi. In-game, Mahakala can only be fused through a combination of Matador, White Rider, Mother Harlot, Daisojo, Hellbiker, and Trumpeter. And Shin Megami Tensei fans will notice these as the Fiends from Nocturne. Personally, I'm not sure why they made this reference, because Mahakala wasn't even in Nocturne. In fact, the only mainline SMT game he's been in is the first one. And he doesn't seem to have any connection with the Fiends in any of his appearances. Maybe it's because the Fiends all have skulls for faces, and Mahakala has often been depicted as having a terrifying appearance. Gameplay-wise, he's a bit weird. On the one hand, he has no weaknesses and a lot of nice immunities, and a stat build that leans towards physical attacking, including having the physical inheritance type. However, his learned skills are mostly magic, despite his magic being very low. He does get both Power Charge and Mind Charge naturally. Combined with his lack of weaknesses, this makes him good to switch to power up other personas. Like most death personas, he also learns Instant Death and Mudo Boost, but I don't think his Marakidains are going to be doing very much damage, even with Fire Amp. And I personally find Myriad Arrows a pretty mediocre physical skill overall. In summary, Mahakala has solid stats and resistances, but if you want to use him, I'd recommend passing down strong physical skills rather than relying on his natural learn set. Vishnu is one of the 3 most significant Hindu gods. He is the preserver, alongside Brahma the creator and Shiva the destroyer. He is depicted carrying a chakra wheel, a mace, a lotus, and a conch shell, as you can see in his design in this game. His wife is Lakshmi, and his mount is the eagle Garuda. Vishnu maintains the balance of the world and protects it from evil. And he often fights against evil forces by descending to the world in the form of an avatar. Among his 10 most famous avatars are Rama, the hero of the epic Ramayana, Narasimha, half man, half lion, Krishna, and Kalki, his future final avatar for the current age. His wife Lakshmi has also taken the form of an avatar and appeared alongside some of these incarnations. In Persona 4, Vishnu is one of the lower-leveled Ultimate Personas, which makes him available comparatively early. But he's also one whose stat spread doesn't really fit his learn set. He has higher magic than strength, but mainly learns physical moves, including the very strong God's Hand, along with Power Charge. He does have the Almighty Inheritance type though, which lets him inherit any skill. Speaking of Almighty, it is a bit of an asset that Vishnu is the lowest level source of Megadolaon among standard fusions. The only one who gets it earlier than him is Trumpeter, who learns it at level 70, but he requires a 6-way fusion. As far as his other skills go, learning Angelic Grace is nice with that high agility. Unfortunately, his skill card is not that great in my opinion. 6% HP recovery every turn generally doesn't make too much of a difference, especially with cost of physical skills being percentage based. For perspective, God's Hand costs 22% of your HP, so this isn't going to discount it very much. Overall, Vishnu is unfortunately not super strong in P4, but he's at least available early by Ultimate Persona standards, and does have easy access to Megadolaon, which is nice. Beelzebub is a high-ranking devil from many Abrahamic traditions, sometimes being depicted as Lucifer's right-hand man, and presiding over the deadly sin of gluttony. His name comes from Beelzebub, which means Lord of the Flies, which may be a pun on the term Beelzebul, meaning Lord of the High Place or Lord of the Manor. It's often agreed that he's a demonized version of a Canaanite deity, but it's hard to tell exactly which one. Many sources say it's the quote-unquote Canaanite god Baal, but that's not really a god, because Baal is just a title, which means owner and by extension lord, and is applied to several Canaanite gods. For further naming confusion, some sources treat Beelzebub as just being another name for Satan. And as a random high school nerd moment that none of you probably asked for, I mainly know Beelzebub from being mentioned in the Porter's speech in Shakespeare's Macbeth. And the main reason I know that is because that speech is such blatant filler that it ironically wraps around to being one of the most memorable parts of the play to me. In terms of gameplay, Beelzebub is another persona we won't have access to for a very long time, at level 81 and requiring a very complicated fusion spread involving some pretty high level personas, including his human avatar Beelzebul from the Moon Arcana. He comes with a lot of immunities though, and a way to kind of get around his light weakness. However, one of his components, Seth, learns Null Light at level 72, so you might want to hold off on the fusion until that level so you can pass it down. Regarding skills to pass down, Beelzebub has access to quad elements via Seth's Wind skills, Belphegor's Elect skills, and can even inherit quite a few elemental amp skills through his components too. He can't inherit ice skills, but that doesn't matter because he already starts with Mabufudine. And he also innately has Mind Charge, and later Megadolon, but can also inherit a lot of mood orb boosting skills and Stagnant Air, several status ailment skills and Ghastly Wail, and even learns one of the strongest physical attacks in the game in Primal Force. Beelzebub is a very versatile persona overall, despite his somewhat lackluster stats for his level. Unfortunately, of all the things his skill card could be, it's only Primal Force. While good on paper, I find the majority of personas you'd want this on either learn it naturally or get something even better naturally. Shiva is one of the three principal deities of Hinduism, the other two being Brahma the Creator and Vishnu the Preserver. Shiva is the Destroyer, but in a benevolent way. In fact, his name even means kindness or benevolence. Shiva embodies necessary destruction that leads to new creation, which makes him perfect to represent the ultimate form of the Tower Arcana. He is revered as the supreme being in Shaivism, one of the major traditions of Hinduism. As a sign of his benevolent and self-sacrificing nature, he once swallowed the poison of the primordial snake Vasuki. To prevent it from harming others, his wife Parvati was able to save him from its effects, though it turned his throat blue. Shiva is known as the Nataraja, or Lord of the Dance, and also as the originator of yoga. His design in this series incorporates a lot of elements from his usual depictions, including a third eye which he used to burn the god of love, Kama, with. You'll know that if you played Devil Survivor 2. Matted hair, a tiger skin, serpents, a trident which represents the three principal deities, and an hourglass-shaped hand drum. In-game, Shiva is unique in that not only do you need to max out the Tower Social Link to fuse him, but he is also a secret fusion. These do not appear in the fusion menu unless you have the components to make them on hand, and there is only one way to fuse them. In Shiva's case, you need to fuse Rangda and Barong. This has been the case in every Shin Megami Tensei and Persona game he has appeared in. This doesn't give Shiva a lot of options for skill inheritance, as most of the skills Rangda and Barong learn are skills he already either has or has better versions of at base, but at least you can pass down Repel Physical. Invigorate 2 and Marakukaja are really the only other decent options I can see here. As a persona himself, Shiva has no weaknesses and solid stats that mainly lean towards physical. even though he learns some decent magical skills and Spellmaster, which is also Shiva's skill card ability, which is amazing. Definitely worth going to Cafe Chagall for, and that's another reason why maxing out Tower is really good. The real thing you want to use Shiva for is his exclusive skill, Pralaya, which literally means destruction, and it's aptly named. Severe doesn't even begin to cover how powerful this attack is. It's the equivalent of Primal Force on all enemies. That is 2,200 power. And if they'd survive that kind of damage, they still have a 50% chance of dying outright, and that isn't affected by light or dark resistance, by the way. Although bosses are naturally immune. This is a signature skill, so it can't be passed down to other personas, but it makes Shiva very popular for New Game Plus playthroughs, since it absolutely wrecks most random shadow encounters. So between that and having the skill card for Spellmaster, Shiva is an amazing ultimate persona to fuse. Also, Shiva is not only a secret fusion himself, he's a component in another secret fusion, which means the Tower Social Link effectively unlocks 2 personas rather than 1. Helel, well, that's the way the main characters say it, but I think it's supposed to be pronounced Helel, well, the short version is this persona represents Lucifer before his fall from heaven. But the actual story of how this persona came to be is kind of complicated. We start with the planet Venus. Because it shines brightly in the morning, rises into the sky, but then falls and is not visible at night, it was used by many different ancient cultures as a metaphor for a member of their pantheon who attempted to usurp the position of the most powerful deity, only to be cast down. And Satan/Lucifer was not one of them. Next we come to the Book of Isaiah. In chapter 14, there's a particular passage that is basically talking about how much everyone will rejoice at the fall of a particular king of Babylon who was oppressing the Hebrews. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pits. So that morning star, son of the dawn part, in Hebrew this is Helel ben Shahar, meaning shining one, son of the morning. It's not a name though, it is just referencing the planet Venus, and the whole thing is really just a oh how the mighty have fallen metaphor. There's nothing demonic here at all. However, later on, people realize how closely that whole speech fit the story of Satan, and they mistook the morning star part as an actual name, the Latin equivalent of which is Lucifer. And so from then on, people considered Lucifer to be a fallen angel and another name for the devil. That one passage is apparently the only time the word Helel is ever used in the entire Bible. But by now, Lucifer has become so ingrained in pop culture that he's become a huge part of Shin Megami Tensei, and hence this persona exists. Speaking of the persona, if you've played Persona 3, you'll probably remember Helel.
Yep, not even the Reaper can survive that.
He was ridiculously overpowered in that game, the source of the fusion spell Armageddon that deals 9,999 damage guaranteed, and it also works on bosses. Yeah, he no longer has that here. He's still solid, I just don't find him to be that impressive in Persona 4, but that's more just because of the inevitable P3 Helel comparisons. He still has his signature move Morning Star, which deals colossal almighty damage to all enemies. Though if the SMT wiki is to be believed, this is only 20 more power than Megadolon. And to be fair, I haven't seen that high damage from this in P4, so I can believe this. He's set up to be a mixed attacker as well, having solid strength and learning God's Hand and Arms Master. One of the main draws of Helel is Salvation. Not only does he learn this by level up, it's also his skill card ability. A lot of people like giving this to all their endgame personas, just be warned that it costs 10 more SP than Medea Rahan, and that does add up over the course of long fights. And there are many late game bosses, including the New Game Plus exclusive super boss, that don't use a lot of status ailments. So in a lot of cases, this skill is actually overkill. So overall, Helel is still solid, but compared to how strong he was in Persona 3, one can't help but say, is this the Persona who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble? The one who made Tartarus a wilderness, who overthrew the Reaper in one hit, and would not let the shadows go home. I'm so sorry. Sandalphon is a powerful angel from Abrahamic tradition, though he's most prominent in Rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity. Sandalphon is described as the brother of Metatron, but this may be metaphorical, as while Metatron is viewed as the human prophet Enoch transfigured into an angel, Sandalphon is sometimes considered the ascended form of the prophet Elijah. Sandalphon is often considered a protector of unborn children, and his name may come from the Hebrew Sandek, meaning Godfather. The second half of his name may come from the Greek Adelphos, meaning brother, but take that with a grain of salt because the name origins are a bit disputed. Depictions of Sandalphon vary a lot, but the one thing all sources agree on is that he is extremely tall. The compendium says it would take over 500 years to traverse the length of his body, but according to other sources, that's 500 years more than a certain other prominent angel, so it may even be longer than that. Some sources say that he's responsible for delivering prayers, hence his title in the game. And speaking of the game, Sandalphon has some pretty solid overall stats, and like many Moon Arcana personas, these stats lean towards mixed attacking, although his light inheritance type prevents him from inheriting physical skills in Fusion, which is annoying. He does learn one of the stronger physical skills in the game, Agnayastra, through level up, and this is also his skill card ability. Other than that, as befitting of an angel, he learns a lot of light and healing abilities, and also learns a skill to cover his dark weakness. He's also one of only 5 personas to learn Angelic Grace, and one of those 5 is New Game Plus exclusive. I'd also like to draw attention to a fusion forecast. If you make any Moon persona on the 3rd of February, that persona will gain the Unshaken Will skill, which grants immunity to all ailments besides poison. It's a long time to hold off on fusing him for, but it's something you may want to remember if you still haven't made him by that point in the game. Much to my annoyance, Asura returns as the ultimate sun persona from Persona 3. Why annoyance? I don't mind him from a gameplay standpoint, don't get me wrong. I just mean from a lore research standpoint, because exactly what mythological entity Asura is supposed to represent is extremely confusing. And I don't think there's any one definitive answer. Asuras are mythological beings in both Hinduism and Buddhism, but are significantly different in both. Not only that, some argue they may be derived from Zoroastrianism, where they're also quite a different class of being. In all cases, they're powerful divine beings, sometimes likened to titans. In Hinduism, they can be either good or evil, but are often at war with the Devas, which are more overall benevolent. The Buddhist depiction leans more negative. There, they are lower-level divine beings that are associated with negative emotions like jealousy and rage. Buddhist Asuras are described as having 3 heads with 3 faces, and either 4 or 6 arms, which is clearly what this design depicts. So, obviously, this is a Buddhist Asura, right? Not exactly. The compendium in the Persona games consistently describes this persona as the king of the Asuras in Hindu myth, known as Mahavirokana, or one who shines on all. However, in some other Shin Megami Tensei spin-offs, such as Devil Survivor 2, Asura has a completely different compendium entry, depicting it as a generic Asura, the violent group of demons from Hindu lore. However, this design debuted in mainline Shin Megami Tensei, so maybe we'll find some answers there. Oh wait, this only makes it even more confusing. Firstly, Asura has been all over the place when it comes to demonic races in the mainline series. Dark, light, law, chaos, he's been all of them and everything in between. He first appeared in Megami Tensei 2, where he was actually said to be the Zoroastrian supreme good entity Ahura Mazda, demonized by a record needle scratch god. However, Shin Megami Tensei 1 would have Asura as the leader of the Chaos faction, and a proud social Darwinist, while still maintaining the Ahura Mazda connection, except the compendium still says he's Mahavirokana from Hindu mythology. My head hurts. And ironically, despite all of the inconsistent portrayals in mainline Shin Megami Tensei, Asura has been one of the most consistent personas in the Persona series. He is always Sun Arcana, his stat spread is usually very similar to what you're seeing here, and he always has his signature move, Unshaken Will, which blocks all mental ailments. It's also Asura's skill card ability. I would highly recommend extracting and registering this card. It's a fantastic skill for any endgame persona. So let's be brutally honest here, Unshaken Will is really the main reason you want to fuse this guy. In terms of his other abilities, he has a wind weakness and no natural way of covering that, which is annoying, but he does learn Primal Force as well as Spellmaster and some decent magic skills. Overall, still a solid persona, but Unshaken Will is the main reason you want to fuse him. Lucifer is the other half of the ultimate star persona, Helel, representing him after his fall. In that bio, I discussed how the name Lucifer isn't exactly appropriate, but it's been attached to him anyway because of pop culture. And in a way, that's fitting. I feel the Lucifer in Shin Megami Tensei, and by extension Persona, is more a product of popular culture than actual religion. Like almost every version of Lucifer you see these days. Seriously, I can't even Google the guy without getting Netflix suggestions. This is the reason why there's a separate Satan persona. It represents the original Jewish Satan, who's quite different, and I'll be able to talk about them a lot more if I get to Persona 5. The Lucifer we're talking about here, I see as being an amalgamation of his two most famous depictions in literature, Dante's Inferno and John Milton's Paradise Lost. He draws his physical appearance from Dante's Inferno. The 6 wings come from that version, as they represent the wings he had as a seraphim, but they've now become bat-like. To jump the gun a little bit to gameplay, Lucifer's affinity for ice in Persona 4 might also come from Dante's Inferno, as there he is imprisoned waist deep in a lake of ice. Meanwhile, his personality and lore is more derived from Milton. Paradise Lost is an epic poem for Christianity in the same vein that the Greeks wrote epic poems about their religion, and Lucifer is generally agreed to be its protagonist, and also one of literature's earliest cases of Draco in leather pants, in that he was supposed to be the story's villain protagonist, but Milton wrote him as a very complex and motivated character, which led to a huge amount of scholarly debate over exactly whose side Milton was supposed to be on. Regardless of what the author intended, this work did pretty much kickstart the trend of Lucifer being portrayed as a tragic champion of freedom, a charismatic master manipulator, and incredibly bishonen. In Persona 4, Lucifer's demonic half finally gets one up over his angelic version in being a major upgrade over his Persona 3 FES incarnation. While I wouldn't call him absolutely game-breaking, he still has some of the highest stats of any Persona minus the New Game Plus exclusive one, and while his elemental affinities might not look that good at first glance, look at his fusion components. Trumpeter, Satan, and Metatron all have easy access to multiple absorb or repel skills, so it's very easy to pass down a lot of immunities to Lucifer. And he learns Absorb Elect, which is also his skill card, and Repel Light naturally. Doing this to Lucifer though won't leave very much room for offensive skills, which is why I personally prefer making Trumpeter invincible over him. Because offensively he's pretty decent, learning Ice Amped Bufudine, Mind Charge, and also Brave Blade. With his stats you can really go for any physical or magical build. Oh, and the elephant in the room, at level 99, Lucifer learns Victory Cry. It's one of the most broken skills in the game, but given that you need to be level 93 to summon Lucifer to begin with, and then need to raise him to level 99, it's not like you really need it at that point. For what it's worth, Lucifer is the only persona to naturally learn this besides the New Game Plus exclusive one, but it's much more preferable to get it early via a skill change. Overall, Lucifer's main use is having access to a lot of immunities while also being able to deal decent damage. But his level requirement means he may fall into, by the time you can get him, you don't really need him territory. Princess Kaguya is a popular figure from Japanese folklore, coming from one of the oldest Japanese prose stories, The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter. If you're interested in Kaguya's story, I would highly recommend the Studio Ghibli film The Tale of Princess Kaguya. Since that film was a direct adaptation, I'll give you this opportunity to skip ahead in the bio if you don't want spoilers for it. In this story, an elderly couple finds a tiny baby inside a bamboo shoot, and decide to raise her as they have no children of their own. She grows up to be a famous beauty and attracts the attention of 5 suitors. Being uninterested in any of them, she sends them all off on impossible errands to retrieve legendary items. And so hilarity ensues as they all either fail miserably at getting these items or produce obvious fakes. The Emperor of Japan also falls in love and wishes to marry her, but she continues to refuse his requests. Kaguya then reveals to her adoptive family that she's not from this world. She's a princess from the moon, sent to Earth either as punishment for a crime, or to keep her safe during a celestial war. Though it saddens her to leave her adoptive family, she can't stay on Earth. She must return to her home on the moon. She leaves behind the elixir of immortality and a letter to the Emperor. He asks which mountain in the country is closest to heaven, which turns out to be what would later become Mount Fuji. He burns the letter hoping that it would reach her, and that explains where Mount Fuji's smoke comes from. Kaguya's story is sometimes considered one of the world's first examples of science fiction. And that's hinted at in her design in this game. She looks to be wearing a kind of space helmet. The rabbit ears are a reference to rabbits being associated with the moon in Japanese culture. Gameplay-wise, Kaguya is very interesting. She has an enormous magic stat, one of the highest in the game, but she relies on fusion to make the most use of it since she only learns light magic skills by level up. She does get Medea Rahan though, which is pretty cool, and Spellmaster, which is also great, but again, this is much better when backed up by magic skills passed down. Her skill card ability is also kind of lame, mainly because Unshaken Will outclasses Fast Heal entirely, and there's another ultimate persona that has a skill card for that. Overall, Kaguya has the potential to be a great magical glass cannon, but she's heavily reliant on inheritance to reach this potential. Good thing then that she's exclusive to Golden, where you have much more control over inheritance than the PS2 version. This time, I'm going to start with the gameplay and do the history later, because I know that's what you're all here for. Yoshitsune is level 75, is made through a 5-way fusion of Masakado, Shiki-Oji, Okuninushi, Hachiman, and Hitokotonushi. You don't need to have maxed any social links to summon him, and all of these persona components are fairly easy to get. You can get them by shuffle time even. And for that, you get a persona with amazing agility, strength that doesn't look that high at first, but it grows very quickly as he levels up, and believe me, he will level up. No weaknesses, and naturally repelling electricity and light, and starting out with Brave Blade and Power Charge. This already has the makings of an excellent physical persona, possibly one of the best in the game. But that's actually the least he can do. Well, actually the least he can do is Zeodyne. He is one of only 3 personas to learn Heat Riser, but that's also not the main thing you want to be using him for. What you want is that final skill at level 83, Hasor Tobi, which literally translates as 8 boat leap, but in some ancient arcane language probably really means everything dies. This skill is completely ridiculous, and it alone makes Yoshitsune one of the best personas in the game, possibly the best. 8 hits of light physical damage to all enemies doesn't sound like much. until you realize that power charge, attack buffs, and defense debuffs apply to every hit individually. All of that adding up means that most regular encounters that aren't immune to physical will be instantly swept, and even bosses can often find themselves losing about half their health, and that's if they're lucky. It's a signature move and so can't be inherited, but Yoshitsune himself is so good that that really doesn't matter. Oh, and Power Charge is his skill card, so not only is he the best physical persona in the game, he also makes all of your other physical personas better. Also, for some reason, the game developers decided to give him even more favoritism because he gets 2 fusion forecasts dedicated specifically to him. On December 19th, he'll learn Arms Master. This is kind of pointless since if you have a high enough rank of Tower, Masakado will learn Arms Master upon fusion anyway, so it's easy to get this passed down. But on the 24th of December, the last possible day you have for a deadline, fusing Yoshitsune will grant him Debilitate, one of the best skills in the game. This does require you to give up your Christmas Eve date, but from a purely objective gameplay standpoint, it's definitely worth it. Now that we know how much of a legend he is in-game, let's check out his real-life legend. Yoshitsune is based on a real-life samurai, Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the 9th son of Minamoto no Yoshitomo, who lived from 1159 to 1189. He fought in the Genpei War, which helped his half-brother Yoritomo consolidate power. He's known for defeating the equally legendary warrior monk Benkei in a duel, gaining his respect to the point where Benkei served him for the rest of his life. However, following the Genpei War, his half-brother Yoritomo became more suspicious of him, and Yoshitsune allied with his uncle to oppose Yoritomo, and was forced to flee. He was later betrayed by the son of the lord he was staying with, leading to Benkei's death and Yoshitsune committing seppuku. However, as proof that Yoshitsune was considered completely and utterly broken in real life as well as in video games, many begun to speculate that he didn't really die. In one account, he fled to Hokkaido and became the Ainu folk hero Oki Kurumi, who you might know if you've played Okami. But that's not the craziest Yoshitsune lives myth. One theory says that he fled Japan entirely and started going by another name, Genghis Khan. Now, this is completely laughable, no way this was historically true, but Yoshitsune is powerful enough in Persona that it's hilariously fitting he has such a ridiculous reputation even in real life. When Izanagi returned from Yomi after his failed attempt to resurrect his wife, he was stained with kegare, or uncleanliness or defilement. When he bathed himself, this filth became 2 deities of calamity, Yaso Magatsuhi no Kami and All Magatsuhi no Kami. Magatsu Izanagi therefore represents Izanagi before this cleansing ritual, at least mythology-wise. From a Persona series standpoint though, I personally feel it may harken back to the concept of reverse personas from the Persona 2 duology. Like Persona 4, the party members face their shadows in that game, but unlike P4, instead of transforming into monstrous forms, they instead fought by summoning reverse versions of their hosts' personas, representing the reversed form of those arcanas, and also the negative qualities of that god from mythology.
I shall return you to the soil. I am the goddess of licentiousness and bewitchment. Now, come to death's embrace.
That's my line.
I am the goddess of beauty, virtue, and love. I am you. You are me. Let us now become one.
Get her!
Magatsu Izanagi could therefore be considered Izanagi's reverse persona. And according to the art book, Magatsu Izanagi is meant to be the closest thing the protagonist gets to fighting their own shadow in Persona 4. I also like to take this as a sign that Adachi never accepted the negative parts of himself. By fighting the same way the shadows in Persona 2 did, it shows that Adachi at that point in the story has become indistinguishable from a shadow. Speaking of that fight, in gameplay terms, Magatsu Izanagi has the exact same elemental resistances as Adachi did as a boss. And his entire skill set as a playable persona is just a scaled down version of Adachi's boss moveset, which includes some useful tools like the Fear Ghastly Whale combo and Heat Riser, which is also his skill card ability. On the one hand, this is great because Heat Riser can't be passed down through fusion, so skill cards are the only way to pass it on to any persona you want. On the other hand, as both ways to max out Adachi's social link leave you with no way to access Cafe Chagall, you can't obtain this skill card until a New Game Plus. Stat-wise, Magatsu Izanagi is a solid mixed attacker with good stats in every area except luck. His biggest weakness, in my opinion, is his inheritance type. Power Charge combined with his strength stat would make him a decent physical attacker, except that he can't inherit physical skills through fusion, so if you want to use him physically, I hope you've stockpiled a lot of good skill cards like Primal Force, God's Hand, and Agnyastra. Despite that, his base kit is very versatile and likely contains a solution to most random battles you'll run into, so despite being obtained late, he's still a solid option. Izanagi no Okami, or Great God Izanagi, also known as Izanagi no Mikoto, is the true form of Izanagi, one of Japan's two creator deities. Descending into the underworld to revive his wife Izanami, upon seeing her horrifying visage, he fled. She cursed the world in response, vowing to kill 1,000 people every day. Izanagi replied that he would make sure 1,500 people were born every day. After cleansing himself of the underworld's filth, he left the world in the hands of the three sibling gods born from that ritual, giving the heavens to Amaterasu, the seas to Susanoo, and the night to Tsukuyomi. While the original Izanagi Persona's outfit draws inspiration from Japanese delinquents and cheer squads, common stereotypes of its rebellious youth, Izanagi no Okami wears a business suit and tie, representing the protagonist finally making the transition from childhood to adulthood. So, Izanagi no Okami is one of the game's final bonuses, awarded on a New Game Plus for getting the true ending in a previous playthrough. Is he as good as he's cracked up to be? Well, he has some of the best base stats of any persona, resistances to everything except light and dark, and he learns pretty much every skill you'd ever want on him. And in Golden, he can inherit an enormous variety of skills from his component personas. However, he has several downsides. The first is that he's of the World Arcana. While this is cool in theory, in practice there's no world social link, which means he gets no bonus experience on Fusion. He also can't be registered to the Compendium either. And you have to re-level all the way to 91 on a New Game Plus in order to summon him to begin with. Also, unlike Orpheus Telos in Persona 3, Izanagi no Okami is actually not all that optimized for the super boss, because this super boss does not instant kill you for having immunities. This makes his elemental affinities vastly outclassed in that fight by the likes of Trumpeter, Beelzebub, and Metatron, among others. He definitely got his chance to shine as DLC in Persona 5 Royal, but that's a story for another day. In his debut game, he's very much a bragging rights reward, albeit a very fun one, and I'm still really glad that he doesn't count towards your Compendium percentage.